Well, we're picking up where we left off last week with HO scale, the mother of all scales. Kind of a fun scale.
I like that one.
Well, it's everybody's, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but it's probably the most popular scale that's ever been created. Back when I had my HO railroad, I loved this because I loved big, monstrous Union Pacific motive power.
Ah, without the big monstrous storage area to keep it.
Well, how do you have a big railroad in a large scale when you're doing these kinds of models?
Right.
I kept the models, but unfortunately I had to get rid of the railroad. But I also had a love of the diminutive little models in HO scale. And the nice thing here too with HO is you can go either way. You can model the big monster brutal engines like those big turbines, or these little tea kettles.
Which are my favorite.
Which are your favorite. And you can do narrow gauges, which is fun. And that's what we're really getting to this week, are narrow gauges in HO scale. These HOn3 models are really quite small.
Oh, they are. Look how tiny.
And that makes it a little bit of a challenge to model in this size. Because these guys are quite tiny, but there are a lot of kits and a lot of brass locomotives and so on available in HOn3. And so it's always been quite popular. But because it's challenging, a lot of people have gravitated toward the larger scales. We've graduated to the big, F scale, the big monstrous engines, because that's so much simpler than working in these teeny, tiny models.
Well, there's something really fascinating about this size. The first thing I think about is storage and area where to put it.
Yeah, and there is something to be said for just tiny when you're doing scale models.
Right.
And you're working really small like this. Every little detail just seems so amazing when you almost need to get out a magnifying glass to see it.
Right. And the folks that scratch build these, I mean, it's just amazing. I can't even imagine.
Yes, some of those models are built by Doug Jolly and they're scratch built.
Right.
Now, these models here, this is an even narrower gauge. This is HOn30, HOn2.5, and I built some of these back, I don't know, 25 years ago or something. This was another gauge of track I had on my HO scale railroad.
Right.
So this week we're going to be looking at HOn3, OOn3, HOn31.5, and HO meter.
Meter?
Meter. HOn3 is most popular in the United States, but in Great Britain, where they love to do 00 scale, they like OOn3, and HOn3.5 and HO meter are quite popular in other parts of Europe. This is the New Mexico Narrow Gauge Modular Club.
Right, this is one of my favorites.
They show up at a lot of different conventions and train shows.
Oh, I'll say.
And it's always fun to see these guys. Just an amazing railroad.
Oh, no kidding.
So well crafted, and it follows the theme of their area, if you will. And yet it's Rio Grande Western, Denver and Rio Grande Western, but it's very southwest.
Yes.
Very New Mexico. HOn3 uses a 10.5 millimeter gauge track, which makes that 100% accurate 3 feet at 1/87th scale. OOn3 uses a 12 millimeter gauge track, which makes that an accurate 3 feet at the 1/76 scale, which is 00 scale. And then HOn31.5 and HO meter also use the 12 millimeter gauge track, which is something of a cheat. It's inaccurate in HO scale for those to represent 42-inch gauge or meter gauge. But the reason everybody's using this 12 millimeter gauge track is that's the old TT gauge track left over from TT scale that was so popular in the 1950s. 00 scale is, of course, very popular in Britain.
So are there very many 3-foot gauge in Britain?
Well, not in Britain, but you know, it's very common in Ireland.
Oh, interesting.
And the famous railway on the Isle of Man is a 3-foot gauge railroad.
Wow.
So OOn3 is a somewhat popular scale and gauge in Britain, in Great Britain, especially Ireland. But a lot of people love modeling the Isle of Man.
Oh, I'll bet.
Because, I mean, what an amazing railroad. The Isle of Man is best known for its motorcycle race.
Right.
But when I think of the Isle of Man, I think of its 3-foot gauge railroad.
And adorable locomotives.
I think you would say stinking cute.
Uh-huh.
Now this is the Eureka and Palisade number 4, our friend Dan Markoff's engine. And he takes it around to all kinds of different 3-foot gauge railroads and runs it. But you know, he almost took it to the Isle of Man.
Oh, no, really?
Isn't that something? And you would think, well, loading it onto a ship, first you'd have to transport it to the East Coast. Not Dan. No, you know, he's a pilot.
Oh.
So his plan was to fly this in a C-5A Galaxy.
Oh my gosh.
And because he knows people in the Air Force and astronauts and stuff, you know, he almost pulled it off.
Well, there you go. Or maybe it didn't go.
It didn't go, but it almost went. Anyway, that really would have been something to see Eureka running with these little tea kettles on the Isle of Man.
Oh my gosh.
And then maybe somebody would have modeled the Eureka in OOn3.
Well, they still might. You never know about these things.
You never know. Now, this was a fun group. We ran into them at one of the narrow gauge conventions, the European Train Enthusiasts, and they have a modular railroad modeled principally in meter gauge.
Oh.
So they're using that 12 millimeter track and running meter gauge trains.
Oh, that is cool.
And they had some displays here to explain how their track gauges work. Now the small track to the far left is HOE, and we will get back to that next week. This one in the middle is a Shinkansen Code 70 meter gauge.
Oh.
So 12 millimeters. And then the one to the right of that is a different manufacturer. So it's, I think, a Code 83. It's a heavier rail, but also meter gauge. Now, notice, too, that there's a center rail.
I was noticing that.
Isn't that? So Shinkansen makes a rack kit so you can add rack rail to the meter gauge for doing cogwheel trains.
So that's HOE.
Yeah.
This is HOM, and BIMO make actually two, one in 83 code and one in 70 code, which is by Shinohara. But they also make a rack track, and you know, that comes as a kit, so you can look at it.
My.
And it's actually, you know, 2 lamels, half pitch offset. And the other thing here is, you know, mostly on the German and Austrian, when they bring the HO car, they put it on little dollies and then they put it on the dollies so they don't have to transfer the load. It doesn't run. It runs always middle of the summer. No, it doesn't.
Now, we've had a small amount of experience with rack rail at Pikes Peak.
Right.
And that was just really fun. There isn't a lot of cogwheel railroad in the United States, but in Switzerland, it's quite common.
I would imagine.
And there again, it'd be fun to get over there and ride their cogwheel trains.
Right.
Anyway, it was sure fun to see a meter gauge railroad, a European meter gauge railroad at the narrow gauge convention.
Oh, it was.
Just not something that you normally get to see. And 12 millimeter gauge track is used on a lot of Japanese railroads because standard gauge in Japan is 42-inch.
Oh my.
Now, their high-speed trains that they're better known for are what they would consider wide gauge at our standard gauge, 4 feet 8.5 inches. But they chose that because then they can sell their high-speed trains in more markets.
We just grabbed at Evanston.
These locomotives are made by Blackstone Models, and they are some of the most beautiful HOn3 models. And I think they've really helped keep HOn3 alive because you can simply buy one of these, set it on the track, and run it.
Isn't that nice?
The sound is already installed. It's got tsunami sound systems on board, and they're actually made by Soundtracks that makes the soundboards. They're currently not on the market.
Oh, serious?
Serious, yeah. They have run out of them, and they haven't done a run in quite some time. You can get them on eBay.
Oh.
But unfortunately, right now, Blackstone is not building any of these, and they don't have any in stock. But HOn3 is far and away the most popular HO narrow gauge. And even when you travel to Europe or China, Japan, everywhere you go, American Western narrow gauge in HOn3 is the popular thing to do if you're going to do a narrow gauge. Not surprising, I guess, because it's just so beautiful.
It is.
And it's got a lot of rich history, and there's some really wonderful products available. Well, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please click on the upcoming subscribe button and possibly even think about becoming a member.
Right.
By clicking on the join button. Costs a few dollars a month, but boy, it sure helps us out. But if you're not a subscriber, do subscribe. That won't cost anything, and it really helps promote the channel. And again, the easy way to subscribe is by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Sunday.
Right.
With a Sunday show. We'll see you then.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.